I'm Mike, and today we're going to look at some results of the recent blood tests that I got after being vegan for about 6 years, and then I want to say a few things about whole food vegan eating and some comments challenging me that I got a few days ago. It's going to be fun. I'll just put that at the end. You don't have to watch it. All right, let's go. Now, I wasn't able to get every single nutrient tested, sadly, but I was able to get my B12 levels, my blood protein levels, and also my whole lipid panel. My doctor would not let me do all the tests. He was like, you're perfectly healthy, it's a waste. And I was like, but I'm vegan. Doesn't that mean I could be missing something, huh? I mean, look how thin I am. I mean, people skinny shame me on YouTube. Then he was like, you're smack dab in the middle of the normal BMI range. Nice try. At this point, I'm just joking, but you get the gist. I wasn't able to get everything. Alright, let's start with my B12 levels really quickly. I have been vegan for several years now, so those B12 stores that I would have before going vegan would technically be running low. And I have had periods where I've been really bad about taking B12, and overall I probably average like twice a week, which I need to get better about. But I do eat fortified plant milk several times a week, so at least I'm covered there. Okay, let's look at the results. The reference range is 200 to 900, and I was above the middle at 675. So how does this compare to the average omnivore? Here is a chart from the Canadian government on the average levels of B12 by age. Now, my levels were in picograms per milliliter, and I had to change them to picomoles per liter to compare them, which puts me right there at about 500 picomoles per liter, quite above the average omnivore for all ages and my age group specifically. So I can rest easy, but I'm not gonna stop taking it. In fact, I'm gonna take it more consistently just to get in the habit. It really only costs me a few cents a day. All right, now to my free blood protein, which is also known as my serum albumin. I've had so many people concerned about my protein since going vegan, so this will be interesting. When I got the results, I called my mom and I was like, I have a protein deficiency, and she was like, oh my, well, I can't say that I'm surprised, honey, you're vegan. But no, I was punking her in the range of 3.5 to 5.0. Mine was 4.9. Intuitively, I always knew your protein levels were good. Now remember where you get your curly hair. And according to this study, that is higher than the average omnivore, the average person that eats animal flesh and their byproducts under the guise that they need the protein. And the vegans were at 4.9, exactly where I am. Okay, now let's move on to lipids. I am always preaching about ideal levels of bad or LDL cholesterol being between 50 or 70. So if mine weren't, that would be pretty hypocritical. Thankfully, it was right there at 50, where populations that don't have heart attacks and primates are, as this study that I always mention mentions. Now, my total cholesterol is at 107. I know a lot of people are going to be like, that's too low. Yeah, it might be heart attack proof, but it's too low. And I will do a video about this in the future and make an actually good case for it. But for now, I will just say that it is right in that range of 100 to 150 that populations that don't have atherosclerosis are at. And that study was not done by some biased vegan doctors trying to say that low cholesterol is good. No, that was by Lauren Cordain, one of the founders of the paleo diet, actually. My HDL, known as good cholesterol, was in the normal range. It's known as good cholesterol because it clears out the LDL, or bad cholesterol. And my triglycerides were at 80, below 150 is good. Now, I will say it does appear that I have genetically lower levels of cholesterol. People that eat the exact same way as me, I've seen have higher levels of cholesterol. And I do actually eat at restaurants about 3 times a week, which is not ideal. But this is hilarious because I do have a lot of people in the comments under Unnatural Vegan's recent video criticizing me, saying that I'm orthorexic. And basically one of the only foods I've ever eaten on camera was a field roasted sausage. Anyway, whatever. Now, for the sake of whole food vegan diets, I do want to address some of the claims that Unnatural Vegan made in her recent video. I didn't want to do a whole response video here, so I figured I'd just tack it on the end of this video. If you aren't interested in this next section of the video, it's not your thing, fine, just stop the video. Thank you for watching the blood part, though. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. For you others, let's keep going. Alright, just like how I explained why I thought Unnatural Vegan was wrong when she said that meat doesn't cause cancer a while back, I now want to explain why I believe she was wrong in most of what she said in the response video to me. That still is not a reason to say misogynistic or violent things about her in the comments below. That doesn't help anybody. According to Unnatural Vegan, my whole food vegan diet is a superfood-based diet that is not economically viable or feasible. She bases this off how I used chia seeds as an example of how to get enough plant-based omega to create enough DHA using conservative numbers to completely cover your bases. As many of you could tell, my Preventing Deficiencies video was simply showing examples, options for how you can meet your nutritional needs, which she took to mean tyrannical mandates of what you have to eat every single day. A simple explanation of why this is wrong. To say this is a Volkswagen Bug, it is an example of how you can meet your transportation needs with a car, is not the same as saying this is a Volkswagen Bug, you must drive the Beetle and only the Beetle every day. That is the only way to transport. And that covers 80% of her video. But seriously, other examples for chia are flax, which I've covered in previous videos as well. But for omega, she goes straight to canola oil. And since I follow the recommendations of Dr. Esselstyn, who has reversed more cardiovascular disease than virtually anybody else, who says no oil, and that includes canola oil. Why?
Because of the brachial artery tunica test, I told you we now know what are the foods that every time they pass your lips, you injure, you imperil, and you compromise the capacity of your endothelial cell, you injure your HDL cholesterol, and you disfavor your endothelial progenitor cell. What are the foods that do that? Any oil, pure virgin, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, canola oil, canola oil, canola oil, palm oil, injures endothelial cells.
And there are other studies on other reasons why canola oil is not a health food, but just to back up Esselstyn here, this study found that just a few tablespoons of canola oil decreases your arteries' ability to function to dilate by over 10%. Extra virgin olive oil was even worse, so it's good to keep your oil consumption down at the very least, not to make it a nutritional target. And the ironic part of her economic attack on my whole grain and legume-based diet, the cheapest vegan diet I've ever eaten, is that buying bulk chia online is actually cheaper per pound than buying these bulk specialty mock meats that she regularly promotes. A 6-pack of Beyond Meat chicken tenders, $10 per pound. Also, flax is even cheaper, as low as $3 per pound. Then she attacks my mention of sesame butter or tahini as a source of calcium, even going as far to mention in the comments that it was worse than she previously thought. This made me actually laugh out loud, not only because tahini is an ingredient in hummus, the vegan cornerstone, but this atheist's personal nutritional god that comprises 90% of her recommendations, the vegan RD, makes the exact same recommendation. Make sure you are getting plenty of calcium by choosing food, blah, 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 or tahini. This just proves to me that it was less about me actually being wrong and more about her just disagreeing with stuff that I said because I said it. But she's not biased in any circumstances, not like the evil Dr. Gregor who she criticized for being biased in the same video. She then dismisses what was actually just a reiteration of the literature on calcium supplements from the Journal of Bone Mineral Metabolism. This isn't me misinterpreting the literature, this is me reiterating the recommendations of experts. Which is the opposite of what she did when she recommended against getting a blood test, which I said might be a good idea if you're curious. Finally, if you really want to cover yourself and you are so fortunate, why not get a blood test every so often?
How about instead we follow professional advice and take a few safe, cheap, effective, convenient supplements?
Again, this is hypocrisy because she links blood test, which I said might be a good idea if you're curious. Finally, if you really want to cover yourself and you are so fortunate, why not get a blood test every so often?
How about instead we follow professional advice and take a few safe, cheap, effective, convenient supplements?
Again, this is hypocrisy because she links Jack Norris, another vegan nutritionist, in virtually every description of her videos. And Jack Norris says if you're curious about your nutrient levels for a particular nutrient, get them tested. Here's an example with DHA. Might be like, that's fine, Mike, I don't really care about that stuff, but didn't you just outright misconstrue what she said about whole food vegan diets being crazy and took that way out of context and used all that manipulative editing?
He intentionally edited his video to make it look as though I said whole food, plant-based is crazy. Next up is crazy vegan diets, unsustainable, over-the-top extreme vegan diets. Not only are diets like really raw and also for unhealthy, but they're also really off-putting to most people. I'm also going to include the whole food plant-based movement here as well. While, eating a diet dominated by fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes obviously is not crazy. The way that it is promoted by some followers, unfortunately, it's not exactly rational and it's not very inclusive.
That's what she said, and while some of her viewers didn't buy it, most of them did. In the video, under the category of crazy vegan diets, she said, I am going to have to include whole food vegan diets here. Here being the place that she defined as crazy vegan diets. She says that because she went on to state that a diet predominated by whole foods is healthy, that she did not actually believe that a whole food vegan diet was crazy, despite putting it in the section about crazy vegan diets. And then proceeded to rip into whole food vegan diets for another 15 minutes, even almost painting them as an eating disorder. Maybe that was just my interpretation. Here's why a diet predominated by whole foods is not a whole food vegan diet. It is not semantically correct to say so. The definition of predominates is the main element of, the greater in number or amount, the majority of. Let's look at an example of a diet that is predominated by whole foods, in which the main element is whole foods. 70% whole grains and legumes, and then, 30% breakdown between cocaine, alcohol, oil, and powdered sugar. It would be one thing if all the literature showing that a vegan diet that was predominated by whole foods reversed heart disease and diabetes, but it doesn't. It is a whole food vegan diet without oil, without refined foods. For example, an Esselstyn's study of nearly 200 people with advanced cardiovascular disease, of those that stuck with the whole food, vegan, oil-free diet, they had 100 times less heart disease and stroke than those who didn't stay with the diet. The power that has for preventing diseases cannot translate to a standard vegan diet, a vegan diet that includes a reasonably large amount of processed foods. That is why I cannot ethically recommend that somebody stays on a standard vegan diet for their whole life. That just wouldn't be right. But to be completely fair, so many times I've mentioned, you can choose where you want to be on the scale in terms of whole food vegan diet. It's whatever's worth it for you. Maybe you want to have some cocaine in your diet. I'm just joking. But maybe you really want to prevent these leading killing diseases. Maybe one of your immediate family members died of heart disease and you don't want that to happen to you. This is the best option. And no, just because you take a couple supplements does not mean you're not eating a whole food vegan diet. Supplements are not food. The fact that I support recommendations to take B12 and a DHA pill every few days if you are not getting enough omegas in your diet does not mean that I don't promote a whole food vegan diet. In conclusion, I did not misrepresent Unnatural Vegan's opinion on whole food vegan diets being crazy. She misrepresented her own beliefs by her use of language. To illustrate this one final time, I'm simply gonna switch out the topic here. Next up, crazy diets. I'm gonna have to include a vegan diet here because, well, a mostly vegan diet is healthy. A lot of vegans are crazy and will shame you. On top of that, it appears that she pretended to believe that my examples of ways to meet nutritional needs were mandates that were the only possible way. This is obviously dishonest. And then she went on to promote her agenda of squashing the vegan health message, which many times she has said is not compelling. This is unethical because she deliberately hides information on a healthier vegan diet from her ethical vegan followers, which could prolong their life, and the longer living vegans with less heart disease we have, the better off a vegan movement will be. And no, presenting a cascade of healthiness that can be chosen to be eaten on a vegan diet does not turn people away from veganism. Could it perhaps be more damaging that virtually every single video in her feed is a vegan on vegan attack video, which is why I'm just simply hiding this one at the end of a video so that I don't pollute my feed with more vegan vitriol. Alright, well that's it for today. Sorry if this feels like drama to you, I'm just trying to defend myself. Alright, see you next time. Feel free to like and subscribe and all that stuff, and thank you for watching.
Oh yeah! Fire in the hole! Locked, loaded, and locked again! Let's do this!
I'm Mike, and today, how your body transforms over time on a vegan diet. Now, I could just flash some success stories like how Tammy lost 70 pounds in 2 weeks on a vegan diet. Those stories are out there. But instead, I want to be a little more intellectually honest and look at about 8 clinical trials and several other studies on actual vegans, not just sort of plant-based people, and see what happens to your body and when. Now, quick disclaimer, this is not what will happen to you if you go vegan. Everybody is different. Everybody has varying levels of disease and unhealthy diets that they're coming from. And I also want to say that no, if you eat 300 calories a day or 5,000 calories of beer and potato chips on a vegan diet, this also will not happen. Most of the studies in this video are going to be using a diet that is recommended by virtually all of the main plant-based doctors like Esselstyn, Campbell, McDougall, Barnard, Greger, etc. And I'm sorry, that is not a diet based around processed foods. It's a more balanced vegan diet. All right, let's take a look at what happens on the first couple days of going vegan. If your previous diet included drinking cow's milk, then you will no longer have mammalian hormones manipulating your own hormones. As this study showed, after drinking milk, less than the USDA's recommended daily amount, by the way, we see a 25% increase in estrone, which is an estrogen, and about a 20% drop in testosterone. Here is a study showing an inflammatory response just 2 hours after eating sausage and egg muffins. So you can kiss that reaction goodbye. And I do want to touch on a fear that people have with the first couple days of a vegan diet, which is understandable with bloggers like this who ate Beyonce's vegan diet for 4 days and all she got was gas. Now, I don't doubt that this is possible. I mean, your fiber intake is going from maybe the 15 gram a day US average all the way up to 30 or more grams a day. And there are studies on an increase in fiber, particularly beans, which will be eaten more on a vegan diet. You may have heard beans, the more you eat, the more you fart, but in reality, it's more like beans. 3% of you might fart more for a couple days, but then life will be better. No, that's not going to become a playground favorite anytime soon. As this study mentioned, with an increase in bean consumption, only a small amount of people, the green bar, notice any increase in gas. And the giant red bar, that's no symptoms at all. And as this other study mentioned, those symptoms were shown to fade at about 48 hours anyway. You can then go on to reap a lifetime of benefits from legumes, which, as this study mentioned, were the one food most associated with survival in elderly populations across the world. And it's important to note that this first week on a vegan diet, this isn't just your stomach getting used to vegan food. This is a shift in enterotype, a shift to a vegan gut biome, which means less flesh-eating, potentially pathogenic bacteria, and more protective species, as this study mentions. Specifically from a more Bacteroides-dominated enterotype, Bacteroides feeds on animal proteins and fats, like what we are made out of, which might be why it's more associated with colon cancer, shifting to a Prevotella-dominated enterotype, which feeds on plant material and is more protective. Here's one that demonstrates this vegan gut shift. Those on a vegan diet had higher levels of short-chain fatty acids like propionate and butyrate, which are highly protective, and those who didn't adhere to a vegan diet had higher levels of trimethylamine oxide, as the study mentions. Eggs, beef, pork, and fish are major sources of carnitine and choline, which are converted by the gut microbiota to trimethylamine, then oxidized in the liver and released into circulation as trimethylamine oxide, which is linked to atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disorders. Now getting to 7 days in, I think it's fair to say that most people's digestive systems will have adapted by this point, and I want to address the myth that you will poop 7 times a day, as some bloggers have said. As this massive Oxford study found, yes, this was studied, vegans only poop about 7% more than vegetarians and are 3 times more likely to be regular than omnivores. All right, moving right along to week 3, we are reaching our first clinical trial, which demonstrates putting a group of people on a vegan diet and then measuring the changes. Dr. Esselstyn's trial of about 200 people going on a vegan diet with cardiovascular disease demonstrated clearing of arteries at this point. Here is a before shot of blood flow shown in red using a radioactive tracer showing largely blocked blood flow in one of the patients, and here is much higher blood flow in the same patient 3 weeks later. Essentially normal blood flow. All right, moving on to week 4. This is where you die of a protein deficiency. Not! Actually, vegans were shown to have higher levels of blood protein than omnivores, which was statistically significant and possibly linked to their lower inflammation. Alright, now we're going to fast forward a few weeks. All the while, changes are happening, but we're going to look at a few clinical trials that measured those changes at the end, starting with one at 12 weeks. This randomized control trial showed that if you have diabetes, it is possible to have your blood sugar lower by 28%. This one, at 14 weeks, showed that if you are obese, you could see a 13-pound weight loss, a 3% body fat loss, better gluten tolerance, and insulin sensitivity. At 16 weeks, this study put people who had migraines on a vegan diet, and 88% of them showed improvement in their headache pain, and the number of people that needed medication for their headaches lowered by 1/3. And let's not forget the potentially life-saving 22-point drop in total cholesterol. And now another trial, this time on office workers, which is especially relevant because they're normal people not selecting for disease. They found that they had an 8.5-pound weight loss and their blood work improved across the board. Now to 22 weeks out with a larger diabetes trial, 43% of these type 2 diabetics were able to lower their diabetes medication. And again, we saw about a 30% lowering of blood sugar levels, as well as a massive lowering in LDL or bad cholesterol, and a 13-pound weight loss and a couple inches off their waist gone. And now another 22-week trial, another office worker trial, again looking at normal people. Of the statistically significant findings, they found that, quote, the vegan group reported improvements in general health, physical functioning, mental health, vitality, and overall diet satisfaction compared with the control group. Counter to the myth, quote, the vegan group also reported a decrease in food cost, though to be fair, increased difficulty finding foods when eating out. But most impressive of all, the vegan group reported a 40 to 46% decrease in health-related productivity impairments at work. That was based off how many days of work they missed for health-related impairments and how much time at work they missed for them as well. And that means that no matter what you're trying to do in your life, a vegan diet can help you get that done without having a health-related impairment. Perfect example. I, in all the times on my YouTube channel, have never had a sniffly nose or missed making a video due to some flu or cold, and I probably just jinxed myself, but it's true. And a quick reminder, all of these studies will be linked in the description below if you want to take a closer look at these numbers. Alright, moving on to 6 months, even a low-carb vegan diet will lose you 12 pounds and lower your LDL or bad cholesterol by 18 points. So you can eat a variety of vegan diets and still see these benefits. Okay, let's look a little bit further down the line to one of the longest vegan trial follow-ups, back to Dr. Esselson's cardiovascular disease study. After 12 years, those who stuck with their vegan diet only had a 0.6 chance of having heart attack or stroke, and those who fell off the wagon had a 60% chance, 100 times more heart attack and stroke. Now, once you get past the length of dietary trials and are officially a long-term vegan, then you can glean some insights from population studies. And with that, I want to mention a point that you really can't expect all of the results that you've seen earlier in this video while still eating a lot of processed foods. But if you take your previous omnivorous or vegetarian diet and eat the same proportion of processed foods that you did then in your vegan diet, you will still see benefits. And I say that statement based off these population studies on vegans who eat a standard vegan diet and still see massive benefits, like 63% lower incidence of hypertension or high blood pressure, 62% less diabetes overall, 16% less cancer, 15% lower mortality, 10% less heart disease, a normal BMI average, 10% less hypothyroidism, and more. But if you want to go all the way to ditching processed foods, I do have a video on a whole food vegan transition, and I will link it below with a lot of other better resources for doing that. In conclusion, though it's really impossible to know exactly what changes will happen and when for you, we can gauge from the clinical trials in other studies that you will most likely lose weight if you are overweight, lower your blood sugar if you have diabetes, clear out your arteries if they are clogged, lower your cholesterol, have a better, healthier microbiome, increase your productivity and mental health, and ditch those hormones that manipulate you in dairy products and those inflammatory animal products altogether. And last but not least, a clearer conscience because you are not eating those cute cuddly animals which you love. I know you love them. Alright, that's it for today, but I do want to quickly mention that this was a request video as one of you was trying to go vegan and needed a little bit more motivation, so feel free to request what you want to hear me talk about. Alright, thank you for watching, and feel free to subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one.
Woo! Yeah! Woo! Yeah! Hell yeah!
I'm Mike, and today, how to cut through the bullcrap diet advice, eat a balanced vegan diet, and escape getting a deficiency. We're gonna go through some main nutrients one by one and just see how much of a concern they are and how much you need to eat to get enough. A lot of people are starting a vegan diet with the new year, and to be honest, follow the wrong person's advice, and you could gain 40 pounds and get a B12 deficiency. Just eat 5,000 calories a day. Doesn't matter if you're 5'2" and sedentary, you'll be skinny. Nope, none of that here. But listen to a little bit of science, learn 3 or 4 important things, and you may be able to achieve your weight goals, your blood work goals, fitness goals, and maybe even reverse the disease. Not to mention, helping your animal friends. Quick point, I am not a dietitian, which is why I will be reiterating the recommendations of dietitians and quoting the nutritional research, which as usual will be linked below in the description. I think it's really important to first note that with every diet comes its own set of due diligence that must be done. If you're eating an omnivorous diet, it's a great idea to dodge tuna because of the heavy metals and other contaminants, and to watch your cholesterol intake. Like the shenanigans that can go wrong when you eat raw meat is so dangerous. So it's not unreasonable to expect that there are some things that you should be aware of when you're on a vegan diet. This is not exposing the inherent flaws of a vegan diet. It just means that it's a different diet, a fact that is highlighted by the nutrients that vegans get more of. As this study mentions, there's vitamin A, vitamin C, B6, B9, potassium, magnesium, manganese, copper, and iron. And just in case you're still concerned about whether or not you can get all the nutrients you need on a vegan diet, here is a statement from the largest group of nutritionists in the world. Once again, reiterating in 2016 that a properly planned vegan diet is nutritionally adequate for all stages of life, and they went even further this time, saying that plant-based diets are more environmentally sustainable, use fewer natural resources, and do less environmental damage. Okay, I'll get to the nutrients. Let's start with the most common concern, protein. After a lifetime of being told that protein is super important, people tend to get triggered when I say that protein is really not a concern here, but please let this sink in. Vegans, on average, have higher blood protein levels than omnivores. What does that do to your parent? And furthermore, that a protein deficiency is only really possible with starvation or an extremely restricted vegan diet. This is why it's a good idea to go to chronometer.com and just track what you eat for a couple days to get intuition. And this is just a problem of anybody switching a diet. Not getting enough calories is actually a complaint of people that go on the paleo diet. This is largely from eating a completely different way than you have your entire life, and in the case of a vegan diet, because plant foods have less calories per bite. So unless you decide you don't want to eat any nuts and any seeds or any legumes, and maybe just eat oranges or something, if you eat enough calories, you will get enough protein. Now, for the second biggest one, B12. Despite there being many vegans out there, like Fully Raw Christina, saying that you do not need to supplement, the consensus of plant-based doctors is that you either need to take a supplement or eat fortified foods with B12 every day. It's misleading because your body can recirculate B12 for many years potentially, but this is just the best insurance policy. So a few months down the line where you're like, I don't really need to keep taking this, you pick that B12 right back up and you take it. And I just have a clarifying point. In my previous video, I mentioned that nori sheets, like those used in sushi, do have enough bioavailable B12 in the form of cyanomethyl and hydroxylcobalamin to meet your B12 requirements and have been shown to raise the blood level of B12 in rats. Still take a supplement. Next up, DHA. If you want your brain to still kick ass when you're 90, then you gotta get your DHA on lockdown. Lock it down. DHA is a long-chain omega-3 fatty acid that your body can convert from ALA, which is a plant-based source, or you can get DHA from fish who get it from algae. Your body can only convert a limited amount of ALA to DHA, so you need to make sure you're getting enough ALA from plant sources or take an algae-based DHA supplement 2 to 3 times a week, as many plant-based doctors suggest. But let's say you don't want to supplement. Let's take a look and see how much ALA from plants you need to eat to make enough DHA. Okay, so you need about 300 milligrams per day. And I can tell you right now, most people are not eating fish every day on an omnivore diet, so they are missing that mark. Conversion rates from ALA vary. On the very low end, it's 2%. The average seems to be about 3.8%. That's an often quoted number. But on the high end, young women have been recorded to convert 9% of ALA to DHA. There is good reason to believe that your conversion rate goes up when you don't eat fish, as this study shows, but we can't really put a clear, reliable number on it, so we're just gonna ignore that. 1 serving or 3 tablespoons of chia seeds, which would ideally be crushed for absorption, comes out to 5,400 milligrams of ALA. If you're really bad at converting, that's a little over 100 milligrams of DHA that comes out. Average conversion would be about 200 milligrams, and a young woman might convert up to 480 milligrams. So if your average, like 1.5 servings of chia would cover you, I just so happen to have 1.5 servings of chia right here. Notice anything at first? It's not a dead fish. And this is really, it's really like a smaller serving of chia pudding if you add some water, and that stuff's delicious. Ground flax and walnuts are 2 other good sources, and thankfully, vegan products are starting to add DHA, like Ripple's pea-based milk. And now for my next segment, looking through the BS. No, that's not a real segment. No, you cannot get enough omega-3s to make enough DHA from bananas. You would have to eat 200 bananas in 1 day. That right there is a challenge for Freely the Banana Girl. She already unsubscribed from me. It's okay, I can say whatever I want. Now to iron. It's ironic that I even put this in here, pun completely intended, because one of my best friends actually cured her lifelong anemia by going vegan, but that's just an anecdote. Anyway, I still want to mention one trick that can ensure that you get as much iron out of your plant-based sources as possible. Many people like to point out that plant-based sources of iron are not as absorbable as animal-based or heme iron, the more bioavailable and possibly carcinogenic iron. But as this study showed, eating vitamin C with your plant source of iron can increase the bioavailability by 3 times, surpassing the bioavailability of heme iron. So just like how on an omnivorous diet, it's helpful to know that you might want to spray some lemon on your raw shrimp so your friend Salmonella doesn't come to the party. It's also useful to know that you might want to spritz a little bit of lemon on your dark leafy greens to get some extra iron. Now let's look at some foods to get a practical understanding of your iron needs. 1 cup of black beans is 50% of your daily requirement of iron, and 1 cup of spinach is 80%. Another less talked about nutrient is zinc. Phytates, which are very common in plant foods, have been shown to decrease zinc absorption. So on the safe side, it's a good idea to eat a little bit more zinc, as vegan dietitians have recommended. In Chronometer, that would mean upping your zinc requirement for men to 16, and for women to 12. In order to do that, just click on zinc, check the use custom values box, and then you can edit the minimum value from there. A bowl of oatmeal in the morning can get you pretty far in your zinc requirement, and a quick zinc hack: you can kind of dodge the phytate issue if you snack on pumpkin seeds, which are relatively low in phytates, and 100 grams of pumpkin seeds is about 80% of the normal recommended daily intake. And just to put this risk into perspective, vegans tend to have pretty normal levels of zinc. As this study shows, they're slightly lower than omnivores, but pretty neck and neck with vegetarians. Now, vitamin D. Depending on where you live in the world, this may or may not be an issue. If you get a lot of sun, it's obviously not. But you can also get all the vitamin D that you need by eating mushrooms that are exposed to UV light. As this study showed, they are as effective as vitamin D supplements at raising your blood levels of vitamin D, so mushrooms are certainly adequate to prevent and reverse vitamin D deficiencies, and the vitamin D is not destroyed during cooking. And almost as if they were chilling on the beach, these mushrooms got more tan the longer they sat in the UV light. These are quite widely available at supermarkets. Just be sure that they're advertised to have vitamin D. Next up, calcium, which many people will be concerned about when ditching dairy. It's a bit confusing for how much you need. The WHO still says we need 400 to 500 milligrams a day. The US, the highest in the world, says we need 1,000 milligrams a day, and this study of 212 studies showed that we need to eat about 540 milligrams to maintain healthy bones, and to be completely in the clear, we should eat about 800 milligrams. So you can pick and choose your nutrition authority, but it's quite amazing how quickly you can get to 800 milligrams based off plant sources of calcium. Let's take a look at how you can get there. One serving of sesame seeds, 300 milligrams. A cup of collard greens is another 250 milligrams. That's 550, which will keep you from losing bone mass. But add a serving of tofu for another 250-ish milligrams, and you're at 800 milligrams. And other random foods you eat throughout the day will easily get you to 1,000 if you want to go there. Quick point, the widely accepted recommendation is now to not use calcium supplements because they can spike calcium blood levels and help coagulate and clot your blood. Not fun. This can be taken as a reason to go a little bit lighter on those plant milks like almond milk and soy milk that are fortified because it's essentially a calcium supplement added. That's not a reason to be completely afraid of drinking a little bit though, which brings me to restriction. By now you probably know that I advocate for a whole food vegan diet, but for people just going on a vegan diet, there's a tendency to continue restricting beyond the animal products to an unnecessary level. So I would say if restriction is an issue for you, or you're overwhelmed by a vegan diet period, then you should just focus on getting animal products out of your diet, and feel free to eat a slightly junkier diet in the beginning. One final nutrient I want to talk about, and that brings me to YouTuber Nikocado Avocado, who recently had a somewhat dramatic video about how he believes he has a deficiency. I still think he needs to get a blood test, but he did mention vitamin K2, which I have yet to cover. Most sources talking about vitamin K2 are low-carb blogs, but it is believed to be protective for your heart and bones, and Nikocado's concern is that he's not getting enough because it's in animal products mainly. But here's the deal, our bodies make vitamin K2 from vitamin K1 in plants, sort of like ALA and DHA, and the case for K2 being required in the diet is actually pretty weak. Looking at Chris Kresser's low-carb website, it's clear that the main thing that people are hinging on here is that higher K2 was associated with lower heart disease risk. But in population studies, vegans were shown to die 42% less from cardiovascular disease. No, they weren't dying more of other things. They had 15% less total mortality, and we can observe a 100 times lower incidence of heart attack and stroke in Dr. Esselstyn's long-term clinical trial on a whole food vegan diet. So K2, definitely not a requirement for dodging heart disease, and in terms of bones, vegans were also shown to have equivalent bone density to their omnivore counterparts. But heck, if this whole K2 thing really bothers you, just order some natto online, which is fermented soybeans, which has some of the highest levels of K2 out there. And it's made from bacteria, so it's vegan. Finally, if you really want to cover yourself and you are so fortunate, why not get a blood test every so often? YouTuber Tia Blanco, who is not just a professional surfer, but she also eats a whole food vegan diet, just got her blood test after 4 years of being vegan, and it turned out to be perfect. And now she knows she's not low in anything, and if she was low, she could focus on that nutrient. And that's just a good idea whether you're vegan or not. In conclusion, the three most important things here are eat enough calories, get an adequate source of B12 and DHA, and beyond that, it's a good idea to eat those vitamin D mushrooms in the winter, maybe spritz some lemon on your dark leafy greens, and eat some pumpkin seeds to make sure you get enough zinc, and you should be pretty well off. With those concerns taken care of, you will no longer have to be concerned with eating cholesterol, eating heavy metals in fish, eating hormones in dairy, and you can enjoy lower rates of diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and many more things. All while lowering your environmental footprint and no longer paying for bad things to happen to those cute little animals that you love. Win for everybody. Alright, that's it, but I also just want to say thank you all so much. When I wasn't looking, I just flew by 50,000 subscribers overnight. I honestly never thought this would happen back in the day when I had like 5 views per video when I started. So thank you for watching, and feel free to like this video and let me know down below if there are any recommendations that you don't agree with that I made, or any nutrient concerns that I just left out. And cite your sources. Alright, Vitamin, see ya next time. Hey, it's Mike here, and on this channel I often look at the health effects of plants, and there's one plant in particular with a unique reputation. It's marijuana, or cannabis, and its real health effects seem to be shrouded in myths and mystery, or are often just misrepresented by people with an agenda. So we're going to look at over 20 studies to see which claims of harm or benefits hold up. Like, is marijuana really not addictive? Does the smoke cause a lung cancer? We're going to look at studies with measures such as puffs per month. So this is going to be very rigorous. And just to state my position, I don't really benefit from determining that weed is healthy or that it's unhealthy. I'm not like vigorously anti-weed or a stoner, so I just want to know the truth, probably like you. All right, so let's go. To start, marijuana is still considered a Schedule 1 drug by the DEA, which means it has a high potential for abuse and the potential to create severe psychological or physical dependence. Are they behind the times with this designation? Well, they do use a 90s style gradient on their website logo. The problem here, though, is that a Schedule 1 drug is difficult to study. Thankfully, we've had a lot of persistent researchers. We have a lot of studies to glean information. All right, we already know that the federal government doesn't like weed. Going through the National Institute of Health's webpage on it, it's clear that their goal is to make weed look bad with only negative statements about it. Their only mention of medical marijuana, for instance, is that it might be creating a false sense of how safe marijuana is. Well, let's see what they have to say about our first topic here, which is, does smoking weed cause lung cancer? Now, most uses of marijuana are in the form of smoking, and the research on this is somewhat conflicting, but despite the NIH generally having a weed is the devil attitude with their write-up on it, they actually go with the National Academy of Sciences 2017 report and state that, quote, researchers so far haven't found a higher risk for lung cancer in people who smoke marijuana. Both of these are pointing to a 2015 study which concluded, quote, results from our pooled analyses provide little evidence for an increased risk of lung cancer among habitual or long-term cannabis smokers. But we need to be level-headed here. Is there really no increased risk for your lungs when inhaling smoke into your lungs? I mean, we're seeing a somewhat increase in cancer in people that just have wood stoves. So, what's up? To complete the statement from the study, no increased risk was found, quote, although the possibility of potential adverse effect for heavy consumption cannot be excluded. Yes, in fact, this next study found a twofold increase in lung cancer for heavy weed smokers, and they did adjust for things like alcohol, cigarettes, and socioeconomic status. And here's another study, albeit a smaller study, that found that the group that smoked the highest amount of weed had a 5.7-fold risk for lung cancer. So why is high use, no pun intended, so differentiated from medium or low use? We know that people who smoke tobacco, things like alcohol, cigarettes, and socioeconomic status. And here's another study, albeit a smaller study, that found that the group that smoked the highest amount of weed had a 5.7-fold risk for lung cancer. So why is high use, no pun intended, so differentiated from medium or low use? We know that people who smoke tobacco, even at relatively lower amounts, still have an increased chance of lung cancer. It's likely due to the way lower frequency of smoking marijuana cigarettes versus tobacco cigarettes. It can be a few times a month for weed versus about 14 times a day on average for tobacco, which is really high. So the total toxic load for weed is much lower than cigarettes, even if they were to have the exact same effect per cigarette. Do they have the same effect? This brings us to our sort of first official claim, which is that marijuana smoke burns cleaner and therefore is way less dangerous to inhale. Well, I don't know about that. According to this study, quote, both types of smoke contain a complex mixture of compounds, some of which are carcinogenic. They both contain hot gases and irritating particulate matter or tars. In fact, weed in certain cases has higher levels of the carcinogen group polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. However, and this is a big however, it appears that smoking weed might simultaneously exert a pro-cancerous and a anti-cancer effect. It seems to have an impressive resume of cancer murder. Quote, compounds found in cannabis have been shown to kill numerous cancer types, including lung cancer, breast and prostate, leukemia and lymphoma, glioma, skin cancer, and pheochromocytoma. On the other hand, we have nicotine in tobacco, which helps hook cancer up to new blood supplies and helps it spread, while the THC in cannabis actually prevents the new creation of blood cells that fuel cancer. So while tobacco is all bad for cancer, weed appears to be a double-edged sort. However, it is certainly associated with chronic bronchitis and compromises your lungs' immune function. But all of these effects are if it is smoked. What about vaporizing? Vaping appears to reduce the toxic load of tobacco cigarettes from this study that measured the urinary toxins of vapors versus conventional smokers. Found that in the case of one carcinogen, it removed 97.5% of it. In the worst case scenario for another toxin, it did this. Still pretty good. But has anybody looked at vaping marijuana specifically? Yes, from this study in the Journal of Cannabis Therapeutics, which, yes, actually does exist. Using chromatography, they found that 108 out of 111 non-cannabinoid compounds were removed. Yet THC delivery levels remain similar to traditional marijuana cigarettes. And you can also dodge the effect of smoke by eating it, drinking it in sodas, or even brushing it on your teeth. They think of So let's move on to the second topic of psychological effects. Researchers have found an association between schizophrenia and marijuana consumption, which has led some people to say that marijuana is triggering schizophrenia in people that are susceptible. But according to this study that looked at the topic, quote, our results provide some evidence that cannabis initiation increases the risk of schizophrenia, although the size of the causal estimate is small. We find stronger evidence that schizophrenia risk predicts cannabis initiation, as the lead researcher of that study simply put, quote, the evidence suggested that schizophrenia risk predicts the likelihood of trying cannabis. So the jury's still out on that one, but if there is an effect, it is likely weak. At this point, I think it's good to look inside the brain and see what's actually happening when somebody is on weed. Simply put by this study, quote, cannabis acutely raises dopamine levels in the striatum, which is a part of your brain that involves reward. So we need to acknowledge here that despite being on another level, weed is activating the same pathway as meth, for example, increasing dopamine. So how does cannabis do it? Well, THC indirectly increases dopamine by decreasing the amount of GABA, another neurotransmitter which inhibits the release of dopamine, so it just lets more dopamine out there. It's kind of like unscrewing the little mesh top on your salt shaker, but probably a little less intense. We should emphasize that this dopamine spike is not as strong as those hard drugs. From this trial, quote, in the largest data set of healthy participants so far, we provide evidence for a modest increase in human striatal dopamine transmission after administration of THC compared to other drugs use. But let's jump 2 studies back to this one done in 2014. They say that marijuana is not associated with that lower dopamine response, that deadening of the reward system, which is the hallmark of using narcotics. But a few of the same researchers decided to test this out themselves. In this 2016 study, they looked at people who were heavy marijuana users and found that they had a lessened dopamine response. Quote, in conclusion, this study provides evidence that severe cannabis dependence is associated with a deficit in striatal dopamine release. But those very researchers point to how it might be a pre-existing low dopamine response that led these people to self-medicate with weed in the first place. But from this next study, they found that the dopamine response was not lessened in moderate to low marijuana consumers, and that differentiates it from other drugs. However, those who started smoking at a young age did exhibit an altered dopamine process, so that is very much worth noting. With all this information, we have to consider that we are rapidly breeding these plants to increase their levels of THC, and in a recent 30 years, we saw a 6-fold increase in the average THC content of marijuana. Like, if we keep raising the THC content and keep raising it, at some point, it's gonna have an equivalent dopamine spike to hard drugs. All of this brings us to our second claim, which is that weed is not addictive. I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. Back to our friends at the National Institute of Health, they just outright call THC an addictive substance. Like, it's addictive, that's that. But from this study, about 9% of cannabis users fit the criteria for addiction to cannabis, and about 25 to 50% of people who smoked daily. This makes it less than half as addicting as alcohol and 1/7 as addicting as tobacco, according to the same study. So I would have to correct this claim by saying that marijuana is not addictive for 91% of people that use it. So we have to ask the question, could it be just addictive for people that already had that compromised dopamine system, or is it taking normal people and making them addicted? Either way, it seems to be a pretty small effect. However, does it lead to more addictive substances? Claim number 3, it is a gateway drug. association with other drugs makes some people say it's a gateway drug, that's it. But there are other factors here. For example, there's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that since it is illegal, when you have to go to the drug dealer on the corner to illegally buy weed, they are also trying to sell you other illegal drugs in many cases. So we have to ask, if it was legal, would that happen? Probably not. But to be fair, experimenting with one mind-altering substance might encourage you to branch out and experiment with other mind-altering substances. But the most important point here is whether or not you think it's a gateway drug. We seem to treat other substances that are widely considered a gateway drug with open arms, such as alcohol. So let's compare alcohol for a bit. Topic number 3, alcohol versus marijuana. Alcohol is a class 1A carcinogen according to the WHO. Marijuana is not on the list, though it does contain some carcinogens. Again, it contains anti-carcinogenic properties. The net U.S. deaths from alcohol, according to the CDC, are 88,000 per year from a variety of mechanisms, such as heart disease, liver disease, and a variety of cancers. Next, overdosing on weed is still considered impossible. From the National Cancer Institute, quote, because cannabinoid receptors, unlike opioid receptors, are not located in the brainstem areas controlling respiration, lethal doses from cannabis and cannabinoids do not occur. But alcohol poisoning kills 6 people a day in the US, according to the CDC. Can you imagine if weed was killing 6 people a day from overdoses? But what about driving under the influence? This French study collected mandatory urine samples directly after 10,000 fatal accidents. They found a small increase in accidents with weed, which was quite small compared to the alcohol accident rate, but adding them both together, being twisted was the most dangerous. This next study, which controlled for more variables, found no increased risk in accidents for people on weed. However, drunk driving kills 28 people a day in the US, nearly 1/3 of all accidents. Heck, 1 in 4 accidents are caused by cell phones nowadays, so yeah. Then there is the violence, especially towards women, as this study found alcohol consumption was associated with increased violence, and quote, when intoxicated, both men and women behaved more aggressively toward a female target than toward a male target. Yeah, we just can't say the same for weed, and this is just the tip of the iceberg for negative effects of alcohol. I want to quickly cover a 4th topic, which is marijuana and the youth. This study seems to show that smoking weed when young can lead to a slightly lower IQ. Quote, impairment was concentrated among adolescent onset cannabis users with more persistent use associated with greater decline. While the researchers point to effects like toxic insult to a vulnerable brain, however, it would be dishonest to not at least consider that a lower IQ might simply be associated with a riskier lifestyle, with marijuana as a risk-taking behavior. Association again. I know. Circling back to alcohol for just a second, marijuana consumption is associated with alcohol consumption, and we know that that kills brain cells. Ability to communicate doesn't actually kill brain cells. The marijuana and IQ researchers hypothesize that THC may negatively affect brain development, and many people have pointed to THC in breast milk possibly affecting infants, but we don't have time to get into infants today. That's just one step too far. I will link a resource at least below. Let's move on to the next claim, that marijuana reduces seizures in children. If you have seen the videos on this, you probably already know that this is certainly true.
They couldn't believe it, that there was no epileptic activity on the EEG, so I gave the doctor a hug.
And to back that with this study, 84% of parents reported a reduction in their child's seizure frequency with cannabis. Of these, 11% reported being seizure-free, with 42% having a greater than 80% reduction in seizure frequency. That is huge. While we are talking about miraculous recoveries, we might as well look at motor disease. You may have seen this incredible video floating around.
He used just a single drop, and his hands afterwards were rock steady.
And as this study states, quote, a number of preclinical studies in different experimental Parkinson's disease models demonstrated that modulating the cannabinoid system may be useful to treat some motor symptoms. Now, really quickly, I want to cover post-traumatic stress disorder. In Canada, they do supply marijuana to some of their veterans with PTSD, and I have met one firsthand, and they claimed it was hugely beneficial. But what about studies? We actually have one that was recently started that is just the most ridiculous, rigorous, scientific-sounding study ever. It's a placebo-controlled, triple-blind, random crossover pilot study. It's funded by the state of Colorado. We will see. Now I want to cover one final adverse effect of marijuana that sort of captures the hysteria around it, and that is from this study looking at adverse effects. They found that, be warned, be very warned, marijuana can cause, quote, altered judgment, increasing the risk of sexual behaviors that facilitate the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. Yeah, I can think of a reason marijuana is bad. You might get herpes. Yeah, yes, that's what I said. No study to back that claim, by the way. In summary, it appears that the vast majority of negative effects from marijuana are from heavy smoking. It appears to increase your risk of lung cancer when moderate to low does not. It might mess with your dopamine system. Well, again, moderate to low likely does not. But we can't ignore the anti-cancer effects, and we will definitely see some more research on that in the future. As for our claims, no, marijuana smoke is not magically harmless. In terms of addiction, very mildly addictive, but still potentially addictive. And is it a gateway drug? Probably a bit, but you don't seem to care about alcohol. So in the end, if you're going to be consuming a lot of marijuana, it appears that vaping is by far the safest way to go. Finally, I would say if all this research changed my opinion on the matter, it is simply that there are people in the pro-weed and anti-weed camps that are both just wrong about a lot of stuff. It's definitely a joke to put it as a Schedule 1 drug when alcohol is not, but it's totally just wrong to say that there are no negative health effects. That's just not correct. But in medical marijuana cases, like epilepsy, for example, it's clear that the positives outweigh the negatives. I wish there was an easy answer, just good or bad, but there's not, sorry. Finally, I'm just mad that making weed illegal means we can't grow hemp, because these headphones should be made out of hemp everything should be made out of hemp bioplastic. All right, let me know down below if you found any of this information surprising. I sure did. Also, let me know if I missed any major points here. And in case you want to learn more about how plants affect your body, feel free to check out my other videos, subscribe for them in the future. And if you learned anything, if you learned a single fact, feel free to press the like button. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
Take some energy, large and recharged. Sweet! Fortification upgraded.
Hey, it's Mike here, and today, a public service announcement. What the Health, the documentary, has officially been debunked by a doctor. Maybe his name is Z-Dog, maybe he comes off more as a bro comedian than a doctor, and he might not cite any studies or anything like that, but he is a doctor nonetheless. A few days back, he posted this video on Facebook, which went more or less viral there. It got over 1 million views in less than a week, but on YouTube, it got torn to shreds and way less views. Now, I'm really gonna try and make an effort to not criticize the name Z-Dog. I get it, he's trying to appeal to a larger audience. His real name is Zubin Damania. That's hard to remember. So this isn't going to be an ad hominem situation. I'm going to go through his main points and rebut them. And unlike him, I can't lean on the word doctor. I am not a doctor. So I'm going to instead use peer-reviewed research and actual sources instead of just saying things like dietary cholesterol doesn't raise cholesterol and then not backing it up at all. Now, before I get into the specifics, I want to mention that he claims to not be against a vegan diet. He's just out to fight that despicable one-diet-fits-all mentality, which is allegedly so harmful. Like, way more people die every year from vegans saying veganism is the only way than our leading killer, heart disease. Don't mind that a whole food vegan diet is clinically proven to reverse heart disease. Whatever. All right, now that you have some background, let's cover his main objections to the movie.
I mean, what exactly are you documenting in this documentary? Like, the fact that you're an idiot for most of your life and are just now realizing that life causes cancer? Like, wow, like maybe this shit in the supermarket that's highly processed is bad for you? That's news?
Now, right off the bat, you can see that he's exhibiting the backfire effect, where you have an overly negative reaction to views that conflict with your own views. You can tell that he knows it's a vegan documentary, and he is there to smear it. Here is his response when What the Health explores the meat carcinogen connection and uses the cigarette analogy.
I wondered if things would have been different had they known the link between diet and this terrible disease.
No, it wouldn't have been different because they still would have eaten shit. That's what people do. You tell people cigarettes cause cancer, they continue to smoke.
This is actually an argument for eliminating all health education. I can't believe I'm actually taking this seriously, but this is a chart of smoking prevalence since the Surgeon General report connecting smoking and cancer in 1964. As you can see, smoking has dropped by about 60%. That is a direct response to health education. Imagine going back in time and telling the Surgeon General to shut up about smoking and cigarettes because people are just gonna keep smoking anyway. That is the doctor you're listening to. That is Z-Dog's logic right now. One thing that really emphasizes the lack of thought put into the video was when he tried to discredit Neil Barnard.
Okay, hold on. How is it that Dr. Neil Barnard gets the title Premier Researcher and Diabetes Expert? Like, what do you need to do to have that?
Come on, man.
Well, as many people have already mentioned, including one of the doctors from the movie, Joel Kahn, in the comments to the YouTube video, actually, he has published multiple peer-reviewed studies, including this 74-week trial, and also has an award-winning paper. But I'm sure he's only ever written a book about cheese. Another thing that was pretty low, or maybe just from a lack of knowledge, was repeatedly flashing not actual science over various parts of the video, including the one that explains the connection between fat and diabetes.
It builds up the amount of fat into the blood. I'm talking about a typical meat-based, animal-based diet into the muscle cells of the human body. And you find that they're building up artificial fat. It's causing insulin resistance.
Maybe he just hasn't seen them, but there are several papers on intramyocellular lipids and insulin resistance. It is actual science, but people are just going to come and see that a doctor is saying that it's not actual science, believe them, and move on. Z-Dog, of course, appears to be of the view that fat does not cause diabetes, it's all sugar. But how can you explain things like Walter Kempner's rice diet, where he fed people rice, fruit, and table sugar, and reversed diabetes, including 25% of diabetic retinopathy cases? That's diabetic blindness. And to drive the animal fat diabetes connection home in particular, from the Adventist study, vegan population that it's not actual science, believe them, and move on. Z-Dog, of course, appears to be of the view that fat does not cause diabetes, it's all sugar. But how can you explain things like Walter Kempner's rice diet, where he fed people rice, fruit, and table sugar, and reversed diabetes, including 25% of diabetic retinopathy cases? That's diabetic blindness. And to drive the animal fat diabetes connection home in particular, from the Adventist study, vegan populations had a 78% lower risk of diabetes, all diabetes. That is not from eating less sugar. And this is sort of where the real controversy happened when Garth Davis explains that it's really hard to get fat on carbs.
Carbs cannot make you fat in and of themselves. We eat carbs, we either store it or we burn it. Now, eat fat, that goes straight to your fat. Your body can't turn those carbs into fat unless you're really overdoing the calories.
This guy actually take a physiology class? Like, are you kidding me? Wait, carbs can't be turned into fat? Like, fat goes right into fat? No. Fat can be absolutely metabolized into ketone bodies and used for fuel, especially in the setting of a low carbohydrate diet.
That is completely irrelevant for 99.9% of the population of Earth who aren't in ketosis.
When you overload your body with carbohydrates, the liver turns it into fat and triglycerides, and it's stored as fat.
Well, technically true, we need to put this in perspective of actual pounds stored, which is what people are really concerned about. From this study on novolipogenesis, even if you are really overdoing the calories, they found that 97% of fat stored was from fat. Only about 3% was derived from carbs. To extrapolate that and put that into perspective, if somebody is 100 pounds overweight, probably only 3 of those pounds are actually from carbs. Now, some of you may have seen that Garth Davis actually made a response video. He had several good points in it.
So Z-Dog, who is now coming in as the expert, was a hospitalist. A hospitalist is someone who works in the hospital treating people that are acutely ill. They never have any outpatient setting where they're treating patients. He has no, and I mean no, background in long-term preventative maintenance of health. They put people in wards and they study this. And they found that when you really carb load somebody for 4 days, I mean, you give them tons of carbs, very, very, very small percentage of that gets turned to fat. If you radioactively label fat and eat it, it does go very fast to the fat store.
And apparently Z-Dog might bring Garth Davis on the show for some healthy debate. We'll see. So why is he so against these one-size-fits-all diets?
One size doesn't fit all. These guys are making statements that immediately discredit them because they're saying this is true for everyone. It's not. Everybody's genetics are different.
Yes, everybody's genetics are so drastically different that, well, what the health might be good for some of you rabbits. Some of us are hyenas that require large amounts of rotting flesh. No, we are all human. We are all the same species. We all have very long digestive tracts that are adapted to eating large amounts of plants, and animal fat clogs our arteries and causes inflammation, unlike, say, a lion. Yes, there are some minor genetic variations, like how the Inuits are genetically adapted to not go into ketosis, which is inconvenient for the keto narrative, but overwhelmingly populations around the world that eat the least amount of meat have the longest lifespans, like the Okinawans back when they were raised eating 97% plants and 80% carbohydrates from whole sweet potatoes and other whole foods. They were the longest living population on Earth, but since they became a pork producer and started eating more of a Western diet, their health has suffered, and now the longest living population on Earth is the Adventist vegetarians, many of which are vegan. At the same time, those with the highest animal product consumption have the lowest life expectancy, like sadly the Inuit populations, and we see that low-carb diets that are high in animal products increase all-cause mortality, according to this meta-analysis. Now I want to explore just for a second that maybe a vegan diet is a one-size-fits-all diet by looking at the case of Esselstyn's study where he put 200 people with advanced cardiovascular disease on a whole food vegan diet. The ones who went off the diet had about a 60% chance of adverse events like heart attack and stroke over the next 12 years, but of the 177 people that stuck with the diet, they had a 0.6%, a 100 times lower rate of adverse events. No, it's not like a third of them were so genetically different that they ended up getting an increased risk of stroke from that severe lack of animal protein. In this case, it quite literally is a one-size-fits-all diet in terms of our leading killer. Maybe not emotionally one-size-fits-all, but physiologically, yes. This next point is like the biggest bro science thorn in my side in existence.
I'm ready.
It is.
Dietary cholesterol is not associated with coronary artery disease, period.
I have a somewhat older video on this topic, but I have another video coming out soon. After all, large amount of cholesterol, bam, big spike, no cholesterol, no spike. And as this study of 350,000 men found, higher cholesterol has a direct relationship with premature death from coronary heart disease. But what about all those studies showing that eating a couple more eggs worth of cholesterol doesn't actually raise cholesterol? This is the result of the cholesterol plateau from studying a sick population that all has high cholesterol, and more bluntly, the main risk of death for all these people is heart disease. But as this chart illustrates, going from no cholesterol consumption to even small amounts of cholesterol can skyrocket your level. But if you are already eating a lot of cholesterol, a couple eggs won't change anything. To put this in more simple terms, now to hippie science bro. Hola, bromo, stop. Alright, let's begin the presentation. Let's say that you've already smoked 4 joints. If you're gonna add 2 joints to that, you will go from high as balls right to high as balls. But if you're gonna smoke the same 2 joints from being stone cold sober, you will go from stone cold sober to pretty dang high. That's bro science. Finally, if dietary cholesterol really doesn't raise cholesterol, how come removing it lowers it so effectively? If you look at the studies of people going vegan, you see that lowering cholesterol every time, and then all the population studies across the board, vegans have way lower ideal levels of cholesterol. And even if you want to latch onto that low-carb narrative, they blame inflammation instead of cholesterol. Well, studies where they put people on a vegan diet, you see their inflammation marker lower by about a third. And I love how he completely dismisses the toxins thing. Just nope.
Oh, Michelle, you used the T word. Toxins.
I get that people throw around the word toxins a lot, but if there's one source that a level-headed person should worry about, it's animal fat, because as this study mentions, 95% of persistent organic pollutants, for example, one type of toxin, comes from animal fat. He even mocks the toxins in breast milk part.
Imagine as the fetus is developing, introducing these very harmful toxins.
Oh my God, like, there are toxins in the meat, and they're gonna get in my booby milk, and the baby's gonna get toxified.
PCBs are one type of persistent organic pollutant, and from the journal Pediatrics, quote, PCBs are stored in body fat and are not
milk, and the baby's gonna get toxified.
PCBs are one type of persistent organic pollutant, and from the journal Pediatrics, quote, PCBs are stored in body fat and are not readily excreted except in the fat of breast milk. And to tie things together here, the Inuits who have a very high animal fat consumption also have the highest levels of PCBs in their breast milk, but telling people not to be concerned about these things just has nothing to do with your anti-one-size-fits-all diet. So what's the deal? And one thing that bothers me for a doctor is that he has this whole everything will be fine attitude throughout the video, like, oh, watch me eat carcinogens, watch me eat this processed meat.
Not only were there carcinogens in every single restaurant, but we find them in every single chicken.
Horrible.
Or, oh, just keep eating all the cholesterol. You're not going to get increased risk of heart disease. Well, guess what? Heart disease and cancer are our two leading killers, so it's not fine. And this next point makes me most disappointed of all. He edits out the part where Milton Mills says that the majority of African Americans are lactose intolerant, and just cuts to the part where he says that the government recommending dairy is then institutionalized racism, and then they just laugh at him and say that he's so crazy.
The government is telling me as an African American eat food that's going to make me ill for no health benefit so that it will benefit dairy farmers. That's a form of institutionalized racism.
Oh my God. What?
People who are crazy, who are behaving in an insane emotional way around this.
It's really not cool, it's really low, and it's really a theme where he essentially edits out the fact, and then he takes the shock statement that is backed up by the fact, and then just makes the whole thing seem crazy, and it's all part of the, hey, don't even watch the movie thing, don't even learn, which is pretty not cool considering people should be able to decide for themselves. And I think a part that bothers me about the video is in the follow-up, he makes it clear that he thinks the video went viral really because of his amazing ability to bust fallacies. No, the video went viral because we have millions of people who have watched What the Health, and they're looking for somebody with any vague level of credibility to tell them that they can continue business as usual, keep eating animal products, keep eating their unhealthy diet, because this vegan diet isn't actually going to help them. People are really just looking to hear good news about their bad habits, and you don't need to be showing scientific literature, peer-reviewed studies, anything like that to confirm people's biases. But in the end, I want to give Z-Dog a little bit of slack here in the sense that I don't think he's actually seen all this research on a plant-based diet. He doesn't know that intramicellular lipids are actually science. He isn't aware that vegan populations have 78% lower risk of diabetes, ideal levels of cholesterol, and I didn't even mention normal BMI on average. You know, I doubt he's seen these interventionary trials showing that a whole food vegan diet dramatically reverses heart disease. He probably hasn't seen the numbers on the novo lipogenesis, or maybe even all the studies on all-cause mortality being increased on low-carb diets. As much as Z-Dog is gonna hate this statement, a vegan diet is a physiologically one-size-fits-all diet. It can help all these people, but telling them to not watch the video, telling them that it's all fake and not actual science and just these crazy doctors is just irresponsible as a doctor. You're passing up a major opportunity to heal chronic diseases, and I don't see him going and attacking these low-carb movies because they're one-size-fits-all, and that's pretty telling. All right, that's it for today. I hope you liked the video. Feel free to let me know down below what you thought, and like and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, see you next time.
Let's get in there! Wow, you suck. Got a little time until they come back. Energy collected. Energy tap upgraded.
I'm Mike, and today, oil, and how eating it kills people, specifically vegans. Whenever a vegan is talking about how they have a lower heart disease risk than people that eat animal products or meat, and they maybe mentioned the Adventist 2 study where vegans had a 26% lower risk of getting heart disease than their meat-eating neighbors, or maybe That review on the epic Oxford study that predicted a 57% lower lifetime risk of getting heart disease for vegans. There's always someone that loves to point out that vegans still get heart disease, and it's true. Vegans are not invincible, but the question is, if vegans are cutting out all the cholesterol and the main source of saturated fats, which is of course animal products, then how do they get heart disease at all? The main culprit appears to be oil, vegetable oils, olive oil, and yes, coconut oil. Sorry, I wish it didn't have to be this way, but processed foods are processed foods. People have no problem accepting that refined sugars are not a health food, but for some reason, people tend to ignore that oil is a refined fat, it's a refined food, and for those concerned about weight gain, oil has twice as many calories per gram than refined sugar does. But oil is everywhere. People slather it on everything they cook, and it covers virtually all restaurant food. Imagine if you went to a buffet and it was just covered in powdered sugar. Rice and beans at Chipotle, covered in powdered sugar, and then maybe you get a kale salad and it's covered in powdered sugar. Oil is bad for many reasons beyond caloric density. Firstly, oils generally raise LDL or bad cholesterol, which is the main risk factor and our leading cause of death, heart disease.
Oil leads to high LDL, and high LDL leads to heart disease, and heart disease leads to the dark side. Death. Death, yeah.
People that boast oil as being healthy for cholesterol levels are probably misrepresenting studies like this study on the almighty coconut oil. Here is the LDL of people on a butter diet, and here is the LDL of people on a coconut oil diet. As you can see, it looks better. So you can spin it as a healthier alternative, but the reality is they both raise LDL from the participants' already dangerously high baseline at the beginning of the study. Coconut oil raised their LDL by 10 points. And from another newer study, a randomized crossover trial, participants' baseline was an LDL of 118, which is pretty high. Put them on coconut oil and LDL raised to 127. Again, it's about a 10-point increase. So coconut oil is not going to give you as much heart disease as butter, but it's still going to give you some heart disease. And LDL is not the only way that oil causes heart disease. There are other ways, one of which you can illustrate with olive oil. Long have we been told that olive oil is super healthy, that it's the secret of the Mediterranean diet, and so on. But even when researchers go out expecting positive results, from this study, contrary to part of our hypothesis, our study found that, well, olive oil impairs artery function after eating it, which is a huge contributor to heart disease. To illustrate how bad olive oil is for artery function, here is Dr. Michael Clapper explaining this study.
He gave them some olive oil, blew a blood pressure cuff for a few minutes, deflated it, and instead of the usual increase in blood flow, there was no increase in blood flow. Olive oil paralyzes the blood vessels from the normal dilation. It's not friendly to arteries.
The researchers found that if you eat a salad with your olive oil, it partially blunts the effect, leading them to conclude, quote, dietary fruits, vegetables, and their products appear to provide some protection against the direct impairment in endothelial function produced by high-fat foods, including olive oil. So it was probably the high vegetable consumption in the Mediterranean diet that kept them healthier than other populations, not the olive oil. But it's not just olive oil. From this study, palm oil and soy oil were shown to be similarly detrimental to artery health. And as this next study looked at another factor that can be very dangerous for your cardiovascular system, after eating a high animal fat or oily meal is the activation of what are called coagulation factors, like coagulation factor 7. This clots your blood, which is great if you have a cut and it's in the right place in the right amount, but inside your artery it can cause a thrombosis or just a blood clot, which is what causes 99% of heart attacks and most of strokes. Here's a chart showing that a high-fat meal in general spikes factor 7, well, a low-fat meal does not. And here's a breakdown of how different fats affect clotting factor 7 based off a table in the study. Here is olive oil and here is butter. They are roughly equivalent and other oils are pretty similar. All of them activate coagulation factor 7. But the damage of oil doesn't stop there. Animal fat and also oil can cause lipemia, aka sludge blood. For a full run-in on that and all the studies surrounding it, you should watch my food coma video, But this study was not in that video. Here's a chart showing fat in the blood after eating a low-fat meal. Nothing. But eat butter, olive oil, or sunflower oil, and the 3 fat-containing meals elicited bell-shaped postprandial changes in, well, fat in the blood. This oily quality of the blood is described as lactescence, kind of like milkiness, and as this study shows, peaks in lactescence coincide with angina attacks, which is a chest pain that is a symptom of coronary artery disease. More specifically, from heart.org, quote, angina is chest pain or discomfort caused when your heart muscle doesn't get enough oxygen-rich blood. As we know, lipemia certainly lowers the oxygen delivery to your heart, which stresses it. So if you're gonna have a heart attack, it's probably gonna be right there. X marks the spot. There's no such lactescence or pain with a low-fat meal. And oil isn't just bad for heart disease risk, it's also bad for diabetes risk, which brings me to intramyocellular lipids, or fat inside your muscle cell. Here is Neil Bernard's explanation of this.
Intramyocellular lipid is fat inside your muscle cells, and that is what interferes with insulin's ability to work like a key to signal glucose coming in. Because glucose is there outside the cell trying to get inside. In order to get in, it needs a key, and that key is insulin. Well, when a person has diabetes, their insulin key is not working. What if I get home, and I'm getting up to my front door, and I take my key out of my pocket, I put it in the front door, wait, it's not working. And there's nothing wrong with my key, but I look in the lock, and while I was gone, somebody put chewing gum in my lock. It's not that there's chewing gum inside the cell. What there is fat.
Dishing the animal fat definitely helps with this, which is partially why vegans have been recorded to have up to 60 or even 68% lower diabetes rate than those who eat meat. But through this mechanism, oil may be the main driver for diabetes in the vegans that do get it. To summarize, let's go back to LDL and put all these diets into perspective. From the National Institute of Health, here is this sad chart. Their optimal is just less than 100. Yet 45% of the US is less than 100, but they're still probably gonna die from some type of cardiovascular disease, so this chart's definitely not gonna do. Shouldn't true optimal levels be where people essentially don't get heart attacks? This study suggests that 50 to 70 is ideal, and that heart attacks essentially don't happen at levels of 57 or lower. Here is a more realistic chart, which is essentially chance of death by heart disease based on LDL, and 57 or lower is considered heart attack proof. Average person and average vegetarian have an LDL that puts them at a high risk. The average US vegan is essentially optimal, but if you average all the Western vegans, you actually get up to 90, which is medium. And then there is heart attack proof based off the study of 57 or lower. To highlight where on this chart you can be as a vegan who does or doesn't eat oil, we can look to Vegan for the Win's video about his blood test before and after he was a junk food vegan or a whole food vegan. His LDL on a junk food diet was 93, which is optimal if your standards are pretty low, but is still putting you at a pretty good risk. But when he went on a whole food vegan diet,
my LDL, the lowest my doctor's ever seen anybody, is 38.
Which is categorically heart attack proof. So in conclusion, you should absolutely ditch the oil if it is at all practical for you. It will definitely make you healthier. And the only reason that you would not want to is if you aren't getting enough calories on a vegan diet, especially if you're used to eating high caloric density animal foods. But you can just replace those with things like nuts, avocados, and seeds, and dodge the oil anyway. But if you're somebody who's transitioned to veganism and you're already overwhelmed by restricting your diet to an extent, then I would say just don't cook with oil. When I stopped cooking with oil back in the day, my skin cleared up quite a bit, so it's definitely beneficial. But definitely work toward not eating oil, because I have friends that go into the doctor's office that are whole food vegans, and the doctor says it's the best LDL, the best blood work they've ever seen in their entire career. So just don't pass up that opportunity. Alright, that's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for watching. I'm Mike, and today, erectile dysfunction. Particularly, we are going to look at the leading cause of erectile dysfunction, a cause that has gone largely overlooked and underappreciated within the public eye. And we're also going to look at the science on the best way to reverse that cause. It's really hard to present what could be a real cure for people because of all these weird ads of instant cures and pumps and pills that make you go temporarily colorblind. But I assure you there is something real here, and if you really want to learn about this and possibly solve your issue, please stay tuned. Okay, let's get right into this. Real quick snapshot, 30 million men in the US have erectile dysfunction. 1 in 4 new cases of ED are men under 40, and by the age 40, you have about a 40% chance of getting erectile dysfunction, and that has a stepwise increase until you reach 70, in which you have a 70% chance of having erectile dysfunction. This is an epidemic. They say the penis is the window to a man's heart, but equally as accurate, the softness of a penis can be the window into a man's heart disease. Actually, it's more like a crystal ball into their heart disease future. I'm not gonna make any more jokes. From this study on cardiovascular disease, 2/3 of the men experienced erectile dysfunction in the years leading up to their cardiovascular disease diagnosis. ED, erectile dysfunction, has been referred to as the canary in the coal mine for cardiovascular disease. It is the first indicator. Getting erectile dysfunction in your 40s, for example, is associated with a mind-boggling 5,000% increased chance of getting heart disease, including a fatal heart attack, in the next 10 years after your ED diagnosis. So why is this such an effective warning sign for cardiovascular disease? Because it is the beginnings of cardiovascular disease. Here's how it works. Just like how most heart disease cases are caused by a clogged or impaired heart artery, most erectile dysfunction cases are caused by a clogged or impaired penile artery. From this paper in the British Journal of Diabetes and Vascular Disease, astoundingly, vascular disease was probably the most common cause of erectile dysfunction, and of all the vascular disease, the commonest is atherosclerosis, or artery disease. See, the penile artery is half the diameter of a coronary heart artery, for example, so a thin layer of fatty deposits on the inside of your heart artery might only decrease flow by about 20%, while on your penile artery, that same thin layer could mean 50% less blood flow. But physical blockages are not the only issue. The way an erection takes place is through the dilation of your penile artery, which allows a surge of blood. But atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries, prevents it from dilating properly. And this is why Viagra works. It's a vasodilator. It forces your arteries to dilate, which logically can wreak havoc on somebody with impaired, damaged arteries, and is likely why over 500 heart disease deaths were linked to Viagra in its first year on the market alone. Studies by Pfizer didn't seem to find any issues. Don't mind that Pfizer manufactures Viagra. That's besides the point. By now you may be thinking, none of this really matters to me. I probably don't have clogged arteries. Well, if you live in the USA, quote, fatty streaks are found in the aortas of nearly all children by the age of 3 years old. Aorta is, of course, your largest artery. These fatty streaks regularly become fibrous plaques in one's 20s, which can certainly impede an erection. In no way is clogged arteries unusual in the modern Western world. Yeah, but aren't a large portion of ED cases psychological? Well, every psychological case is unique, whether it's ED from porn addiction or performance anxiety. Even a minor penile artery impairment can trigger a vicious psychological cycle. Quote, even the most minor organic malfunction can result in psychological consequences, which can progress to so-called performance-related anxiety. Even less severe vascular impairment can delay the establishment of an erection. It's kind of like when you go to start your car and it's not starting right away and then you freak out. So don't write off a physiological cause just because you have a psychological aspect. Okay, so how do you actually fix this, and not just for a couple hours at a time like those pills? Well, the best, most reliable, scientifically proven way to do it is through a oil-free vegan diet, which is shown to improve artery function and unclog arteries, reversing cardiovascular disease, and not just epidemiologically, but in interventionary dietary trials. One of the earlier studies to demonstrate this was by Caldwell Esselstyn in the 90s. He put 22 people with advanced cardiovascular disease on a whole food vegan diet. None of the 17 patients that stuck with the diet had adverse effects like a heart attack or stroke, despite the same 17 people having 49 such events in the 8 years prior to the study. And 70% saw a measurable reversal of their artery clogging. Here is one of the participants from the study.
Anthony and the other male patients also noted another change.
When you're young, when you're a teenager, you see a female and so on, and the first reaction physically, raise the flag, I call it. This happened to us. All the other Dr. Esselstyn's, I call them all the guinea pigs. The flag still rises.
Later on, Dr. Esselstyn did a similar study with 198 people, and among other amazing things, they demonstrated a dramatic clearing of arteries and increase in blood flow after just 3 weeks on an oil-free vegan diet. I have to emphasize this because there are probably vegans getting mad right now. No, not any vegan diet will do. One with processed foods will not get these results. Oil, as I explained in one of my recent videos, though not as bad as butter, can still clog your arteries. But isn't erectile dysfunction just the natural course of aging for men? Well, it really doesn't have to be that way. Here is Colin Campbell, a whole food plant-based doctor, on Bill Maher.
And then I was kind of making a joke about blood flow to the penis, but when people have a bad diet, that's when they need the Viagra, right, Doc?
Absolutely, it's absolutely true.
Age has nothing to do with it. I thought.
You know what I think?
No, it's really true. If we were eating right, we wouldn't need to be selling Cialis and all this stuff, Viagra and stuff like that.
But you're 77, you don't need it, right?
No.
Finally, there is one more significant cause of erectile dysfunction that I've not talked about, and that is medication. A lot of which is blood pressure lowering medication. And depending on the study, vegans have a 60 to 75% lower incidence of high blood pressure than their surrounding omnivore population. Zooming out, ironically, the number one thing between you and your manliness might be your desire to be manly. Grilling all that meat and pounding down all those barbecue chicken wings and so on. To get the point across, I will translate this into bro for you. You're cock blocking yourself, bro. You know, you just gotta go vegan and clear up your arteries and get back in the game, man. You gotta give those honeys your fine man piece. It's clutch, bro. Clutch! Seriously though, we need to fix this. To show how madly people want to overcome erectile dysfunction, we just have to look at rhino horns and the illegal rhino poaching. Countless rhinos are killed every year so that people can grind up the rhino horn because they believe it cures erectile dysfunction, despite there being no scientific proof on the subject. Many rhino species are threatened or endangered, and this demand has pushed rhino horn to $30,000 a pound. Not cool. In conclusion, the most reliable, scientifically valid way to overcome the root cause of erectile dysfunction is an oil-free vegan diet. It's not as easy as a pill, but it's worth it. There are many resources to help you adopt this diet, and I will link them below, along with all the studies I mentioned. Alright, if you know of anybody that has erectile dysfunction, share this video on their social media profile. Actually, just maybe message them privately or something. And also keep a lookout for my future video about how these cardiovascular issues affect women's sexual health. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and see you next time. Bro. You're cock blocking yourself, bro. Clutch!
Blood flow to the penis.
You're fine man piece, honeys.
Raise the flag.
Cock blocking yourself.
Raise the flag.
Clutch! Get back in the game, man. Honeys. Hey, it's Mike here, and today I'm going to do a response to Bonnie Rebecca's Why I'm No Longer Vegan video. I normally shy away from response videos, but I'm doing this one. I'm doing it.
I'm not vegan anymore. As you can probably tell by the title of this video, I was vegan for just over 5 years.
I'm Mike, and today, the ketogenic diet. We're going to look at some keto claims and the going keto narrative and see if it holds up to the research. We're also going to look at some of the unheard warnings of followers of a ketogenic diet, also what happened to one of my viewers when they went keto, and the unforeseen effects in the realm of diet and beyond. Let's start by quickly looking at the basic mechanics of a ketogenic diet, which relies on the state called ketosis, which is normally a starvation state, but the idea is since you're eating enough calories, it's only mimicking starvation. In this state, your body doesn't have enough sugar to run itself and instead converts fat to ketones, which are an energy-carrying acid that can fuel most of your body, but only about 2/3 of a starving brain. The rest must be glucose, which in this case would have to be converted from protein or fat. fat as well. A standard ketogenic diet involves eating 70 to 80% of your calories from fat and only about 5% from carbohydrates and the rest from protein, and looks like this: meat, dairy, oil, eggs, and a few plants on the side. Just one banana would put you over your daily carb limit. Though now it is mainly a weight loss trend, the ketogenic diet was originally a treatment for children with epilepsy. And I will cover that more at the end, but because of this, it has been researched for 100 years, so we have scores of well-designed studies on ketogenic diets. Because keto people who are watching this probably won't believe what I, a vegan, has to say about their diet, I want to turn largely to the words of somewhat of a whistleblower within the ketogenic diet community to look at these findings. So to be clear, much of the information in this video is not coming from me at all. Okay, let's look at the words of Paleo Mom, a ketogenic diet advocate and PhD holding nutritional researcher, and here is what her cautionary statements are about the adverse effects of the keto diet. She says keto is, quote, a diet with inherent risk as evidenced by the extensive list of adverse reactions reported in the scientific literature, and this has not yet been a thorough enough part of the public discussion on ketogenic diets. She clarifies that adverse effects are not just simple side effects, they are actual dangerous reactions. She then says, quote, I feel a moral and social obligation to share what I understand of these diets from my perspective as a medical researcher. Okay, here is her list of well-documented adverse effects from a keto diet. If you're from the US, this will sound a bit like a drug commercial. Gastrointestinal disturbances like diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, constipation, etc. Inflammation risk, thinning hair or hair loss, kidney stones. One study found that 5% of children had kidney stones. Children. Muscle cramps or weakness, hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, low platelet count, impaired concentration/cognition. That is in people, but for what it's worth, we also have studies showing decreased brain growth in adolescent rats. Next, we have impaired mood and renal tubular acidosis, which is when the kidney fails to remove all the acid because ketones are very acidic. Nutrient deficiencies. Many keto blogs downplay the risk of nutrient deficiencies. These are nutrient deficiencies on doctor-supervised diets. There's disordered mineral metabolism, poor growth in children, skeletal fracture, and osteopenia or osteoporosis. All of these are bone problems largely caused by the acidic blood conditions of ketosis. There's increased bruising, sepsis, infection, and bacterial overgrowth. This is likely caused by the hyperlipidemia, which is induced by a very high-fat meal of cream or oil or other high-fat sources. This makes the blood stack like quarters and creates a traffic jam for your immune cells, preventing them from doing their job. There's pneumonia, acute pancreatitis. This kid died of a heart attack on a ketogenic diet after having acute pancreatitis. The researchers highlight the mechanism that a ketogenic diet caused it in the study. There's long QT intervals, which is an electrical abnormality that can lead to sudden death. There's cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the heart is either enlarged or stiffened. In this study, they found that 15% of the children on a ketogenic diet had enlarged hearts. One who had it particularly bad was taken off the diet and recovered, highlighting the obvious dietary nature. There's a shift toward atherogenic lipid profiles, which includes super high cholesterol and triglycerides. There's also heart arrhythmia, myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, menstrual irregularities, and amenorrhea, which is a loss of period, and finally, death. And just because you might be thinking this, Paleo Mom says no, just because a lot of these studies were done on children doesn't mean that these adverse effects won't happen to you. Despite all of these well-studied danger, the going narrative is that keto is safe. Paleo Mom goes as far as to call this dogma, saying it's a, quote, bias-motivated dismissal of any studies to the contrary of this narrative. Now let's look to a real-life example of that hypercholesterolemia or high cholesterol, one of the adverse effects that she mentioned. Let's look a few months back to one of my earlier viewers who will remain anonymous, but let's just say they had keto in their name, so they were really into it. As you can see, they were eating a pretty standard keto diet dominated by eggs and oil and meat and butter. Their fasting cholesterol was at 440. That is deadly. At first, their doctor was like, oh, you're 400 cholesterol, that's just genetic, there's nothing you can do. But then they went on a plant-based diet and their cholesterol level shot down to around 150, which is considered ideal, and that was the largest transformation their doctor had seen in their entire career. And looking at LDL, or bad cholesterol in particular, here's a blogger whose LDL was nearly 300 on a ketogenic diet. Yet low-carb doctor and researcher Lauren Cordain, who founded the paleo diet, says ideal levels are between 50 and 70. Is something not matching up? Now, to be fair, this does not happen to everybody, and the literature is mixed. Here's a study showing that LDL levels stayed about the same, and this study found that LDL can lower a bit on a ketogenic diet, but they did reduce total calories by 400 to 500, which could be responsible for that. But the main takeaway with heart disease here is that despite the convoluted keto narrative on cholesterol, of, oh, the LDL is puffy, so it's fine, and yeah, your cholesterol is skyrocketing, but it's HDL, they have yet to bring anybody down to ideal levels of cholesterol like newborn babies or our ape relatives or vegans. They certainly have not unclogged arteries and reversed heart disease like a vegan diet has. Another notable effect, keto diets were shown to raise cortisol, your stress hormone, by 18%, as this study judged based off urinary cortisol levels. This is because cortisol plays a role in the necessary fat storage involved in a ketogenic diet, but also because you're watching all these people eating carbs and you can't eat carbs. That has to be stressful. But seriously, higher cortisol levels are bad for many reasons, including their association with heart disease, and it makes sense. Your body thinks it's starving to death, it's gonna be stressed out. Another kind of strange, unforeseen, and unstudied effect that I have noticed, maybe you've noticed, is the dark circles under the eyes associated with a low-carb or keto diet. I call these paleo eyes or keto eyes. It is not just my observation, this is all over the forums. One person wrote, "Why is it that whenever I take my carbs down to less than 100 grams, I look like a panda?" And from another who started a low-carb diet, quote, "A few days ago, really dark circles began to appear under my eyes. My wife is really worried." Okay, that can't be good, but let's take a break from the negative effects of a keto diet for a second and look at the main reason that people, the masses, actually try keto diet, and that is weight loss. There is no denying that people have had weight loss results on a keto diet, but let's look beyond the anecdotes and see how it performs. Right off the bat, this study found that when compared to other low-carb diets, a ketogenic diet did not increase weight loss in obese patients and had, quote, several adverse metabolic and emotional effects. And when you look at one of the most touted studies on keto weight loss on obese individuals, you see that they're losing about 1, maybe 1.25 pounds per week, but they are also put on a 450 calorie deficit, so it's hard to say whether this is just calorie restriction or not. And a study on vegan diets in obese patients showed that they also lost about 1 pound per week, though they were also at 350 less calories per day than normal. The main difference here is that a vegan diet is sustainable long-term and does not have that long list of adverse effects, and vegan populations in the Western world at least are shown to be in a normal BMI range on average. But what happens to fat loss when a keto diet is put head-to-head with a normal carbohydrate diet with equal calories? Well, this very recently released controlled feeding trial, which is considered the gold standard and was also funded by the National Institute of Health, found that, quote, body fat loss slowed during the ketogenic diet and coincided with increased protein utilization and loss of fat-free mass being muscle, water, bone, or organ weight. As this chart shows, when people went keto, they had a spurt of weight loss, and that might feel like an accomplishment, but the DEXA scan showed that no, it was hardly any fat, as this chart highlighted. In fact, the fat loss slowed so much that it took the full 28 days on a ketogenic diet to lose as much fat as just 15 days on the normal carbohydrate diet. And in case you were skeptical, yes, these people went into ketosis after just a few days, as we could tell by the fat oxidation indicated in the respiratory quotient. But many keto proponents responded to this study by saying, hey, it was never about any crazy metabolic effects. It's about how a ketogenic diet suppresses your appetite. And to them I say, you can no longer claim that a ketogenic diet's weight loss is from mimicking starvation. It is clearly from actual starvation. This is definitely not a healthy way to lose weight, and this lack of desire to eat enough for your body explains all these adverse effects like nutrient deficiencies. And just like coming out of any other starvation period, weight rebounding is likely. This is well documented on other low-carb diets, and there's no reason to think it's any different. And from the journal Obesity, quote, in the short term, the low-carb carbohydrate ketogenic diets cause a greater loss of body water than body fat. Water weight is regained when the diet ends. And finally, from a logical perspective, if you are training your body to store fat and burn fat, what happens when a preferred source of calories, glucose, comes and replaces the burning of the fat? Then you just have that storage mechanism left over. Next, I want to really quickly look at another reason that people go on a ketogenic diet, and that is to hopefully boost their athletic performance. But as this study shows, people on a ketogenic diet are more tired and have less of a desire to exercise. And no matter what goal you're trying to achieve in athletics, that's not going to help. One thing is for sure, we are not going to see any high-intensity records like any world sprinting records by people in ketosis because they have depleted glycogen stores. Many sources also say that building muscle is not ideal on a ketogenic diet because carbs play a major role in muscle building, but there are really no studies on this, so I cannot say definitively otherwise. Now to what I view as the most frustrating part of the ketogenic diet narrative, that ketosis is the natural state of the human body. Here's Dr. Perlmutter, a ketogenic advocate.
Generally, our state of metabolism was pretty much in a low grade of ketosis almost throughout the year for as long as we've been walking the planet because we didn't have carbs.
This is a completely ludicrous point, but actually quite convenient because we can't measure the metabolism of our ancestors 2 million years ago. But please appeal to logic here. Even the Inuit, who were once believed to be the poster children of ketosis because of their high-fat, high-meat diet, have a genetic resistance that prevents them from entering ketosis. As this study shows, the usual diet of Eskimos shows no ketosis. And looking around the world, shouldn't we see people in ketosis? No, instead we see starch-based population after starch-based population. Even the Yanomami Indians, who don't use agriculture, they do horticulture, they are still starch-based and not in ketosis. And what about all the adverse effects? The reports of people losing their period, is that natural? How about the acidification of the body, which leads to growth stunting and kidney stones in children? No, and the final kicker, as this study showed, low-carb diets, which include many ketogenic diets, increased your risk of all-cause mortality by over 30%. Okay, now it's finally time to look at ketogenic diets and epilepsy. This is how ketogenic diets started in the 1920s, because they found that kids were having way less seizures when they were put on a ketogenic diet. And years later, studies find that about 10 to 15% of children put on a ketogenic diet no longer have seizures, and about half of them have a 50% reduction in seizures. The exact mechanism of this is yet to be determined, but one theory is that a lot of these neurological impairments are caused by the inability of glucose to be delivered properly to the cell, and ketones offer an alternative pathway of energy transport. But I think the main point here is that no, you cannot claim these epilepsy benefits of a ketogenic diet while simultaneously ignoring the adverse effects which were discovered in the exact same studies, and that is exactly what the ketogenic diet community is doing. That being said, yes, I do find the idea of powering the brain with ketones promising and hopeful, but I do not think it's necessary to have a ketogenic diet that's animal-based and high cholesterol, and there is a possibility that we don't have to do this through diet at all. As this study shows, we can raise blood levels of ketones simply by eating ketones. This study demonstrates the efficacy and tolerability of oral exogenous ketone supplementation in inducing nutritional ketosis independent of dietary restriction. Finally, yes, a vegan keto diet does exist and people are experimenting with this, but unless you have a very dire condition, it's doubtful that the potential adverse effects are worth it because your body is still going to reach that acidified state. But moving past personal health, one major concern I have with this diet is that in a time when we are skyrocketing past the point of no return in terms of climate change and atmospheric carbon, this is an extremely carbon-intensive diet. And as this study estimated, a high-meat diet emits about 2.5 times more carbon than a vegan diet, and it's likely that a ketogenic diet pushes even further than that. So you cannot claim to be an environmentalist and eat a standard ketogenic diet, not to mention the massively increased animal impact, the more money that you're putting toward these harmful animal industries, and really it's just not cool to kill animals in the name of weight loss, just saying. In conclusion, if you're one of those people that says a keto diet worked for me, in effect you are saying by mimicking starvation and decreasing my appetite, I was able to actually starve myself, which put me at a risk of increased adverse events such as heart disorders, kidney stones, super high cholesterol, pancreatitis, and even death. That worked for me. So no, the ketogenic diet should not be viewed as a casual diet for anybody to be trying. It should be viewed as a very dangerous treatment with well-documented adverse effects and a massively increased negative impact on the environment and animals. And in the end, there is no reason to believe that any improvements that you have on a ketogenic diet will last long term, so I urge you to not believe the hype and instead choose a more sustainable diet for your weight loss, for the environment, for your health, and for the planet. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Hey, it's Mike here, and today I'm going to kick off the first video in a Veganuary mini-series to help people go vegan with what could be your first 3 meals on a vegan diet. So over the 7 or so years that I've been vegan, I've helped quite a few people go vegan, and I've learned what their challenges were, and I've come up with 3 meals that I view as pretty healthy, not the healthiest possible in the world, but also very easy to prepare and made out of really widely available ingredients that hopefully you can get no matter where you are in the world. And I will say the world is changing. It's easier to be vegan than ever. You could go and get a vegan cheese pizza at Pizza Hut in the UK if you live there, or just go to any Chipotle and get a vegan burrito. I mean, we have Ben & Jerry's vegan ice cream now, and you could just go home and cook everything you normally cook, but replace the animal products with super delicious new vegan alternatives. But those aren't necessarily the cheapest options or always the healthiest options, as they tend to be quite processed. And perhaps most important of all, those are not necessarily available to everybody. So I've come up with a trio of meals that are super easy, widely available, and way on the healthier spectrum. So let's go. Vegan. I bet you didn't know being vegan could be this cheesy. Unsubscribe. And if you're a seasoned vegan, feel free to stay tuned, because this is, in a sense, an intro to the Instapot. But if you don't have an Instapot, don't worry, because we'll talk about the alternative way to cook everything we're going to cook. And the 3 meals that we are going to cook is a choice between a hot and cold cereal with a bunch of amazing toppings. And then the lunch is going to be a roasted potato-based bowl of deliciousness. And then dinner is going to be a pasta-based meal. And so let's get started. Okay, the first step would be shopping. You gotta make sure you have all these ingredients, and it really helps to do the shopping the day before you're doing the cooking when you're doing a big shift like this. So if you're starting on a Monday, do the shopping on a Sunday. And I will have the complete ingredients list for all 3 of these recipes in the description below. And here is the shopping list for our first meal before we get started. As you can see, there's a little bit of variation. You can choose all of those toppings. So, meal number 1. Okay, let's start with our first meal of the day, which is breakfast. It's going to be hot or cold cereal, your choice. I often mention oatmeal and people go, oh, that's so gross. So if you're just going vegan, it's just about finding a cereal that doesn't have animal products in it. So you could go and find a cold cereal and just look on the back of the label and make sure it doesn't contain any milk, eggs, meat, who knows, or other animal products. But I'm gonna show you how I have been preparing oatmeal in the morning lately, and you can just do the same thing with your cold cereal, add the same things I'm adding if you would like to. So there are 2 ways of doing oatmeal that I'm gonna talk about. One is simply cooking it the normal stovetop way, which varies anywhere between a 2-to-1 to a 4-to-1 ratio of water to oats, cooked on medium for about 10 minutes on your stovetop. But I like to cook my oats while I'm sleeping. How do I do that, you might ask? I do that with my trusty Instant Pot, which I've had for a while and have not really talked very much about, because it is a somewhat higher ticket item. It's about $70 for this 6-in-1 which has been great so far. And you can program it to start cooking in the future. So at night, we'll just throw on some oats and some water. I do 3/4 of a cup of steel cut oats with about 1.5 cups of water. So it's a 2-to-1 water to oat ratio at night. And then I go ahead and program it to cook in about 10 hours. So I wake up and my oatmeal is done. But a couple quick things worth mentioning about oats. I really prefer steel cut oats, which are essentially the whole oat groat that is just cut in half. I really like the consistency of those, but I'm just gonna cook some classic normal rolled oats today. And it is the new year, and I think that it's great to take this opportunity to change your habits. And so instead of going to the bulk bin and grabbing a plastic bag, I totally implore you to use a reusable container. Just go and have the store tear it. This one is 0.27 pounds, and so they'll just take that off the weight, and that way you're not using plastic every time. All right, let's make some oats. I know you can do it on the stovetop, 10 minutes of cooking and stirring, you can do it, but I wanna quickly show how this thing works. Okay, here is my 1.5 cups of water. Just crank those in there, and then I'm going to take my 1/4 cup and do 3 scoops of oats for 3/4 of a cup. Once again, 2-to-1 ratio between water and oats.
Elite drone!
Now I usually cook my steel cut oats on manual for 13 minutes, and that will certainly cover these rolled oats, so let's just say that's about right. And it takes a little bit of time for this to get up to pressure, and so we want to add a few minutes for that. So let's say it takes 20 minutes to cook total. So we need to take that into consideration. So if it's 10 p.m. and we want this stuff to be done at 8 in the morning, that is 10 hours minus 20 minutes, so that is 9 hours and 40 minutes. So we're gonna go to, I just have to restart it. So we go to timer, starts on the hour, we'll crank that up to 9 hours, and then press timer again for a minute. If you're not able to get it right away, you want to press manual again to make sure it doesn't continue warming, and just let it go, and you're ready to eat tomorrow. Okay, so while this is cooking, let's talk a little bit about toppings and more about breakfast. So if you're just going vegan, you're just trying to not eat animal products. That's great. But if you're trying to, say, follow the advice of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn to reverse heart disease, you're also going to be, of course, dodging oil and a lot of refined foods, and he might even tell you to eat a handful of steamed leafy greens with breakfast. And that's because of the nitrates, which help clear out arteries. But for me, I just like to eat a healthy vegan diet that prevents disease, hopefully, and one rule I like to follow is eating enough antioxidants to offset the calorie intake. Yes, no matter how healthy you are eating, you are still burning calories, which lead to metabolic byproducts that cause oxidative stress, which you can buffer with antioxidants. And so things like blueberries are awesome to the extent that you can afford them. Frozen is cheaper. And if you really want to micromanage it, there actually is an equation of how many antioxidant units you should eat to match your calorie intake. And that deserves a whole nother video, but the oatmeal is done, so let's get some toppings going. Time to depressurize it. All right, bam, there's the oatmeal. Since this is super hot and the frozen blueberries are super cold, I like to add my blueberries now. And I don't go that hard. And to make it extra creamy, if you want, you can add some almond milk. I'm just adding some unsweetened almond milk. And I have a video about how to make that if you want to get crazy at some point. Now I'm gonna pop it in this bowl. Okay, now whether you went with hot cereal or cold cereal, toppings are pretty key in my opinion, and that just totally depends on what you like. And I always go with cinnamon, and I always do a little apple every day, and I actually like to throw maybe a chopped fig or so, and if I have bananas around, I'll do a banana, and a lot of vegans like to wait until they're basically black. I just like to eat them when they're just starting to get some spots. Decent amount of spots, but not too crazy. And the final one would be ground flax, which is a great source of omega-3s. I've been criticized in the past for recommending super expensive chia seeds, and these are a way cheaper alternative. So let's chop some ingredients. I am all about efficiency, and I want breakfast to take zero time in the morning, so I like to cut my apples like this. I make sort of a spiral with maybe like a 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch sort of distance apart. And then once that spiral is complete, I sort of do some vertical cuts, just so you have maybe half-inch cubes here. And then once you're done with that, you kind of come down the top or bottom.
Entering the objective.
Could have probably cut a little bit deeper there, but now you've got a ton of apple pieces. Fig, I go with really small because this is sort of like my maple syrup.
We're good.
Banana.
Sentry deployed.
Okay, so we've officially gotten way fancier than you need to get, but at least you're getting some ideas. So I'm just gonna go ahead and throw it all in there.
Hey, we should secure that
And this is where I fail as a food stylist.
Large and recharge.
And then I'm going to finish off with about a tablespoon of ground flax.
Sentry reloaded.
And you can't forget your cinnamon.
This'll do.
Okay, final word on breakfast. I went with cereals because they're super cheap, pretty widely available, and just pretty easy to make as well. But there are so many other vegan breakfasts you can do. In my cookbook, for example, I have a vegan breakfast burrito and then also chia French toast, which is super delicious. And there's just infinite possibilities on any scale of junkiness to healthiness that you can think of. But after being vegan for about 7 years, this is what I end up eating most of the time because it is super delicious, super easy for me to make, and I just love it. All right, on to the next meal. And here's the shopping list for lunch for meal number 2. And again, there is a bit of variation, a bit of choice in there. Okay, now for lunch, some of you may be familiar with the Cover Your Ass bowl that I did with Mr. Vegan, with Mr. and Mrs. Vegan a while back. And we're gonna do a spin-off of that. That is the laziest possible thing I can think of so that there are no excuses. If you want the totally nutritionally complete, amazing one, go ahead and watch that video. It's gonna involve the full steaming of the fresh vegetables and all that jazz. But we are going to use an Instant Pot and some frozen veggies and do the easiest possible way. So I'm gonna go ahead and wash some potatoes and drain these beans. And the awesome thing about Instant Pots is that you can do dried beans super easily. You don't have to be eating from a can if you don't like doing that. And so let's go. In my experience, 4 medium potatoes seems to be a good rule of thumb, but rarely do you have perfect medium potatoes. So this was my approximation. 2 pretty chubby potatoes, and then 1 small potato per person. I'm gonna be cooking for 2 people, so let's get chopping. Okay, so the awesome thing about an Instant Pot is that I can essentially cut these guys in half and they will still steam properly. So I'm gonna go the laziest possible way and just cut these in giant chunks and remove any weird nasty parts.
Oh, shit, I'm hurt. They're damaging the trap.
Okay, so for 1 person, it's gonna look like about that much, and I've gone ahead and filled my Instant Pot with water, and I've got my little grate down there, and I can just throw these guys in there.
Come on, Clay. Get out.
And you could go ahead and throw veggies in there, but we're doing super lazy frozen veggies for people that are steaming this normally, in which case you would chop these a little smaller, obviously. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and cook these on the manual setting on high pressure for about 8 minutes. Okay, manual for 8 minutes, which is already on. Just wait a second and it goes.
Jeez.
All right, so that nobody can complain that eating vegetables is too expensive or too difficult, I have chosen the cheapest frozen veggies that I could find. They are from Costco, and we're gonna cook them, AKA warm them up. Okay, I'm just gonna place the veggies on my allegedly non-toxic non-stick pan. That's 1 cup. I think I'm gonna do 3 cups total. 2 cups and 3 cups. This is for 2 people, so about 1.5 cups should do the job per person. Then I am just gonna put them on medium heat and cover them, not adding any water because there's plenty of moisture there. I like to drain and rinse these beans just because I'm not a fan of the goopy wateriness. All right. Okay, it's been about 5 or 6 minutes and these guys are thoroughly defrosted. All right, looks like the potatoes are just about done. So I'm gonna go ahead and vent these. Woo! Oil Express. Choo choo. So when the potatoes are done steaming, the meal is basically done, but if you have more time, you can go one step further, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna go ahead and broil these, get a nice golden brown texture. Let's do it. So if you know me, you know I'm a huge fan of silicone baking mats, but I was testing out the ones from Amazon to see if they were worth recommending, and they're not. They lasted a couple months, and then they got all sort of cracked and crumbly, so until I get new ones in the mail, it's back to parchment paper. Pepia parchment. Not very eco. Okay, ripped off a piece, and at this point, I like to take my giant chunks and just sort of break them up with my knife, and that way I can get some more surface area.
Okay, I got you.
All right, these are ready to go in the oven. So I am just gonna broil on low. All right, there are the potatoes. I'm gonna go right in like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave them in here for about 4 minutes and then rotate them so they get a more even browning, and then cook them for another 3 or 4 minutes. 4 minutes have gone by, and since the ones on the outside are not cooked, I'm moving them to the center and cooking for another 3 minutes. All right, so here is the end result. Yummy, golden brown. And if you want a fancier, tastier version of this, check out the sriracha fries recipe in my ebook. All right, now time to throw it all into a bowl. There is 1 bowl of potatoes, and then about half a can per person of black beans.
Watch out,
And then, once again, half of
Here's some energy.
veggies.
Got it.
Boom, lazy healthiness. Okay, so at this point, you can go and put whatever sauce you want on this. Mr. Vegan and I proposed barbecue sauce. You can also do ketchup, which I really like. You know, we're just going quick and lazy here. You can do some more advanced sauces at another time.
Back off, man.
I also like to throw a dollop of hummus on these, and there's so many options here, but that's it for lunch. And here's a shopping list for meal number 3, the pasta. And again, there are some alternates you can choose between the type of pasta or whether you want to do tofu or a mock meat. Okay, now it's time to make dinner, which is gonna be pasta. I have a bunch of different pasta options here. I've got what I'm gonna eat, which is whole wheat penne rigate. And then I also have a couple just examples of gluten-free ones that you're probably already familiar with, in the sense that this is brown rice pasta. This one's actually a chickpea and brown rice pasta, which is interesting, but it's actually quite good. And then in terms of sauce, I like to make my own sauce out of either tomato paste from a can or preferably some whole strain tomatoes in a glass jar, which I then add spices and stuff. But for your first day vegan, you probably just want to go to the store and buy some vegan marinara sauce. And this is where label reading comes in, and simply you're just looking for no animal products. Underneath, if you are in the US, it should say contains milk if there's milk in it, contains eggs if there are eggs, and of course go through the ingredients anyway and to make sure. One thing I will say about this, and we don't need to have the conversation about oil because I don't believe oil is a health food, but if you look at the back of this label, you can see that about 40% of the calories in here are fat, which means there is a ton of oil in the sauce, especially when you consider that tomatoes are less than 10% of calories from fat. So that's something to consider later. So then in terms of veggies, we can be super boring again and use the same frozen veg sauce, especially when you consider that contains eggs if there are eggs, and of course go through the ingredients anyway and to make sure. One thing I will say about this, and we don't need to have the conversation about oil because I don't believe oil is a health food, but if you look at the back of this label, you can see that about 40% of the calories in here are